Welcome to the Piano and Worship of Berean podcast. This is episode 1 of Only One.
Speak, oh Lord, as we come.
So the piano is a versatile instrument, and when someone says they can play the piano, it can mean many different things. And this podcast is about playing the piano coming from something other than worship music to worship music, or taking your worship skills and elevating them to another level. And we've all come to playing the piano from different paths. Some come through classical music, while others through pop or folk music. Some learn in a group, while others learn by themselves. Some can read music. Others work primarily off of what they hear and their knowledge of chord structure. But what we need to say, what I want to say right at the beginning and recognize, is that even though these are all methods are different, God is not more pleased with one or the other. And I think that's important to say, because in church, people get pretty passionate about what they do or believe in, and you will hear things like this. But I just want to say that there's no evidence in the scripture that God is more pleased with a hymn-playing pianist versus a chord-playing pianist versus someone who can play classical music. Now, we recognize that the time and effort put in is different, maybe more or less. Furthermore, from a learning perspective, we must fight our own tendency to say our way is the best. That said, I want to wrap this all up by saying the most well-rounded pianist is going to be the most good to the group. So the most flexible you are, if you can read from notes, if you can read from chords, if you could hear a song and just play it extemporaneously, you're going to be the most helpful. If we have a choice of 3 pianists, boom, boom, and boom, that's the one I want on my team. And I'm sure that all of you are listening to this because you want to learn new things that will help you play even better. So here at our church, Berean Baptist Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the bulk of what we do, our mission when it comes to our music, is congregational singing, congregational worship. And so we strive, the pianist's job, the guitarist's job, the drummer's job, the worship leader's job, the choir, the vocalist's job, everyone on the team, our job is to try to encourage the congregation to participate. We are not here to show you how great I can play my instrument. I'm not here to show you just how fast I can play or all of the songs that I know. No, the reality is that we're here to support one another, and I want this to be a worship conversation with the gathered believers and our God in heaven. This is a worship. It's not even an experience. I don't like that term. I want a worship conversation, because conversations grow us. And when we get together and we sing, the songs we sing should grow us together, and as we converse. And the most important thing is that we say to God what he has said about himself back to him and to one another on a regular basis. As an aside, by the way, if your music you're not singing with your church, or hopefully you're not singing to your church, but if the music you're picking for your worship times doesn't do this, you need to consider picking better music. So some pianists play strictly from a hymnal, and some pianists can break down the hymn parts into a piano-friendly accompaniment for worship, and some pianists play strictly by chords, and giving them a hymnal is not much help at all. A few pianists can play classical music but don't have any skills with hymns or contemporary worship either. And much of your skill set depends on how you were trained and for what you were trained. So once again, the perfect pianist would be able to do all of the above, sight read piano music in general really quickly. Get the sense of what we're trying to do with this song very quickly, whether that's by reading music or just having this great body of chordal knowledge and music experience. So the next thing I want to talk about is the main takeaway. And if you don't listen to any other part, and if you only got a few more minutes, please listen to this next part. The amount of piano that is played in the worship band or orchestra depends on the overall music approach. When the piano or the pianist is the only instrument used in a church service, all of the weight then falls upon the pianist to keep the worship invigorated with true direction toward the texts that are being sung. When a worship band is introduced in the worship service, the piano has a more narrow field of focus. In fact, in some modern worship settings and songs you may listen to on Spotify or YouTube or Apple, you may not hear the piano used at all. It could be a chordal instrument in the background or something as an additional color or voice that could be taken away without much loss. So, if a pianist wants to be of a good benefit in the modern worship landscape today, then understanding your role that you're supposed to play in every song is a skill that needs to be developed. Now, this just doesn't naturally happen to most people. It's developed. And the best way, or the only way, in my opinion, to do this is just to listen to a lot of different music. And as you're listening, not just listening for casual enjoyment, but you're mindfully breaking down what's going on. You're listening to what instruments they're using. And I would recommend that you listen to the same song with many different types of arrangements. Listen to In Christ Alone and listen to it with a full orchestra, only a pianist in a congregation, or maybe a bluegrass group or a contemporary worship band. And when you do this, you're going to see the effect that the piano will have or the absence of the piano could have. Okay? Just want to give you some quick tips on how I approach the keyboard or the piano. And that's a whole nother discussion we can have with keyboard versus piano. But today I'm primarily talking to pianists who are kind of coming over to worship piano. Maybe from just chords or maybe from classical music. So, first thing you need to know, if you're the only instrument, either at the time in the arrangement in the song or at all, your church only has a pianist, the introduction or what we call the line or hook is your responsibility. Okay, you need to learn this. This is what gives the clues to the congregation. Okay, this is the song we're singing, this is the key we're singing it in, and this is how fast we're singing it. And I would, as an aside, say that it's important as an arranger or a pianist that you don't try to fool the congregation. So here's not where you show off all of the, chord changes that you can move through all of the different keys that you know until you finally get to the key you're going to sing in. No, make it basic, the line or the interesting hook line, and then sing the song with the congregation. So how do you do this? Well, you need to listen to the recording or hook or look on the lead sheet or the piano part or however it is given to you. You need to learn this hook. And I would suggest that you learn this hook in a key above and below. So if it's in the key of G, learn to play it in the key of A. If it's in the key of G, learn to play it in the key of F. Doing this will help you understand and open doors when it relates to intervals, melodic line, and how chords and key signatures all relate to one another. The deeper that you can make that well to pull from, the better off you're going to be. If you can just listen to a song and play it quickly, it's probably because you've got a lot of knowledge of chord and intervals kind of banked in your head. Some people may be natural at it, but most of the time, knowing what keys that you can try and what keys you can't try on your keyboard are very important. For example, if I'm playing Mary Had a Little Lamb in the key of G on my keyboard, I'm going to know that I'm not going to even try a B flat because B flat is not in the key of G naturally. So this needs to be your responsibility. You need to prepare these things ahead of time. And what we have a tendency, or what a tendency I see as pianists, they want to prepare the entire song, and then the entire song isn't quite ready. But my suggestion is prepare the part that you're going to be needed the most, which is to play that hook. A lot of times you can play it even in the right hand only. So even if you're kind of a new fledgling keyboard player and you don't have a lot of left hand accuracy or prowess yet, you can really help your group by learning the right hand hook at the beginning or in the interludes or the turns or the outros of the song. So you need to make this your job to prepare. This is not your worship leader's job to show you how it goes during rehearsal. There's not a bigger blessing to a worship leader than people who show up prepared. And not only show up prepared, but show up prepared to be flexible. As in learning songs in different keys. Being ready to say, oh, you know what? It's not going to work this morning in the key of F. Let's go to the key of E flat. Okay. So the second thing I want to tell you in these tips is the chord structure in the left hand is also your responsibility. We have a tendency as keyboard players, because left hand can be a little bit challenging. We have a tendency to do two things. We look with our eyes at the left hand to make sure we've got the notes right, or we just avoid the left hand altogether, trying anything interesting in the left hand. And so we put a lot of emphasis on the right hand. And depending on the ensemble you're in, that can be helpful or not. So, but especially if you're going to be the only instrument playing, and that's what I'm talking about right now, even whether it's in the arrangement or you're the only instrument in the room, you need to work on your left hand patterns. So here's three things you can do with your left hand that will really help things become interesting. First of all, learn the block chords. Learn the block chords in your left hand. In the middle of the piano, in the lower part of the piano, the tones on a good piano will ring so nicely. A well-voiced block chord can go a long way. A long way. Just think about many of the introductions of City of Light songs and just how they set up the thoughtfulness of the singing. The piano part in the great song from City of Light, Yet Not I, is just whole notes. One chord every measure. The acoustic guitar is playing a moving rhythm part, but the piano part is just these really interesting block chords. So don't underestimate the power of whole note block chords or half note block chords, moving only when needed at times. We don't always have to be busy. And then arpeggios. Learn and practice your scales, your chords, and your arpeggios when it comes to chording. Arpeggios are going to teach you what notes belong in that chord. So first of all, triad arpeggios, and then we can do arpeggios with seventh chords. After you learn the arpeggios, you can take those arpeggios and you can add some non-chordal tones around them, half step down, whole step up, and make interesting left-hand patterns. Adding the 2 to a chord a lot in your left hand is so beneficial. So learning those things is very important. Okay. Now, last thing I'm going to say before I complete this very short introduction to worship piano playing and our vision at Berean is, if you are playing with a band or a group that has guitars, then you do not need to play all the time as a pianist. In fact, I don't want you playing all the time as a pianist. I will hang out some of the time as a pianist. And I know this kind of sometimes goes against the grain of the way we were taught, that, I'm always playing, especially if you were the only one playing. But the reality is we can let the guitarists and other instruments of the group do a lot of the work, and then we can come in when it's important or when our sound is doing the work that no other sound can do. So here's 3 things to remember when considering this fact of not playing all the time. First of all, communicate with your team when you'll be playing and when you will sit out. So use some of the rehearsal time and mark it with a pencil, because you're not going to remember in the middle. I do this all the time. I forget what we said. We went through the rehearsal. I said this, and I barked at people for not remembering, and then I didn't remember. Use your pencil. Have some little things, phrases you write out, in, can be simply put. out second time, in second time. But communicate these things. Get everybody thinking as arrangers when I'm going to play, when I'm going to sit out, why I'm doing this. Play only the right hand. This is a great technique to set up something that's coming later. Several songs I love doing this in Christ Alone. You know, you can do kind of there, in the ground, his body lay, light of the world, by darkness slain. Then bursting forth, you can go back down to include the left hand. So setting it up in the upper tones of the right hand, in an octave up or whatever, maybe even leaving out the third and just doing, root fifth, root, or root fifth, seventh, root, some nice pattern for a few measures can really set up some nice things. So consider using only the right hand. Maybe sometimes using only the left hand and allow some space for another instrument like a violin or flute to have the upper area. Always consider who's going to be in your space, what they're doing, and if you're duplicating what they're doing. Okay, some instruments should duplicate. Violin sections are made of instruments that are duplicating what each other are doing. Some instruments should not. Bass guitars. You don't need two bass guitars. You don't need competition from the left hand when you've got a really great bass going on. So consider these things as you play. And then this is the most important thing, and going back to the songs we sing as the church. Use the text as your guide. I can't say it enough. Be an arranger. Use the text as your guide. Have this worship conversation with the congregation. Look at what they're doing. Are they singing? If they're not singing, consider, what can I do as a keyboardist, as a pianist, to say, let's sing a little more. Let's get a little more involved. This conversation is not loud enough. This conversation is not quiet enough. This conversation is too loud. So save yourself for an important section that requires more instruments. Or sometimes you can be the only instrument for an effect. Well, I hope this brief introduction has helped you. I'm going to be including also some links to some material where you can actually do a little practice and some examples of some of the things I've talked about. Anyway, I love you all. I love your willingness to serve in the church. By giving you some instruction and guidance, in no way am I saying that you're unimportant and that what you know is not important or that you're not a good piano player. But we just want to all make sure that we're on the same page when we come to approach to how we're going to lead worship. And so thanks for listening and have a great day.